for some time now. And I was wondering how you first got involved, how you got interested in becoming a youth advocate for mental health. Did you have personal experience with mental health, or was it something that always interested you, or how did you just get involved in that world originally?
Yeah. So for me, I think it honestly really sort of kicked in when I got to college. I had sort of struggled with mental illness most of my life, like, in high school, going to college, but coming from an Indian American background, that was not really something that people were comfortable talking about. Like, there's stigma, I think, everywhere, but especially from my experiences with Indian American communities, like, it is just absolutely a taboo topic. And, growing up, it was something that my parents didn't really want to talk about, didn't want to acknowledge. And so things started to get worse and worse. And then I went to college and was struggling a lot in classes, struggling a lot in general. And I think finally my junior year is when things sort of hit rock bottom for me. And I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which came as a shock because I knew virtually nothing about it when I first heard about it. And I struggled in school. I ended up being hospitalized, having to get lots of different types of treatment, ended up like basically bombing all my classes. It was just like a whole bunch of stuff at once. And the university asked me to leave and take some time off. And so that was sort of when things started to click in my mind that, like, hey, there's something serious going on here, and I think I need to address it. And so I was back home, which for me is Pittsburgh, for almost 2 years. And I spent a lot of time, working on myself, trying to get treatment, trying to get help, therapy, medications, the whole deal. Um, but I realized that this is something that a lot of people face and they don't know how to talk about it. And so I spoke to a lot of my friends, and especially those from Indian backgrounds, other cultural backgrounds. A lot of people had a lot of difficulty talking to their families about this, getting treatment, struggling with school. And the thing that I noticed the most is that people felt a lot of guilt dealing with this sort of thing. And I think part of that is just based on the nature of mental health and mental illness. It's sort of invisible. Like if you walk around with a cast, everyone knows, and they'll give you like
Yeah.
sympathy for it. But I think for mental illness, people don't really know how to react to other people. And so I noticed that this was just something that a lot of my friends were dealing with but didn't know how to talk about. And so that was sort of what got me inspired to get into this space. And so while I was home, I worked on this app called Anemone that I built, which is basically a mental health crisis app. And it allows people to create a customized crisis plan. So that includes important information like medications, coping skills, early warning signs, preferred hospitals, emergency contacts, sort of all of that important information. And it puts it in one place, and they can export it, share it with friends, family, first responders, mental health professionals, just so that's all in one place, so others can support them if they're in a crisis. And then the app also has emergency resources where it connects you to like local hospitals, the National Crisis Line, text line, 911. It has coping skills. So there are like different forms of therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and it uses some of the main skills from those. And then there's also something called a virtual grounding box where the user can upload like a photo and a song, and whenever they feel overwhelmed, they can sort of revisit that, and it has like positive quotes, affirmations. And so this is what I worked on basically on my time off from school. And then I came back to school and I realized that part of the problem isn't just how individuals deal with it, but it's how the whole environment is. And especially like I study computer science, and engineering is one of those very hyper competitive, very diverse environments where people come with all different sorts of backgrounds, different perceptions around mental health. There's a whole big push on like getting good grades, focus on academics over well-being. And so that really made me realize that I think people need to be more involved in this space, especially like, in my environment back on campus. And so it just sort of took off from there.
Mhm. So this idea of making a mental health crisis plan before it happens, that's a really cool. I love that idea because I think it's another thing about mental health is that we think about it as it's a problem when it's a crisis, but we don't think about maintaining it generally. So is that an idea that's gaining traction in the mental health community, or is that something you came across yourself, or how did you get the idea for that as a strategy to combat mental health illness?
So honestly, I think the main reason I thought of this is just from my own experiences with like, being in inpatient hospitalization settings, partial hospitalization, a lot of different therapy or psychiatric settings. They require patients to fill out a crisis plan, but typically it's this like, clunky packet of papers, like a whole stapled packet, and it has all your important information. But it's 2020, you can order a cab when you want, you can order a burger when you want. There's no reason you need to keep a packet of papers, especially something that could be so potentially life-saving. And so I really, really felt that there was a need to make a digital version of that and make that more portable so that no matter where you are, you can access that information. And then the other thing, I think exactly what you're talking about in terms of the differences between physical and mental is that, especially as kids, like growing up, we're taught so much about physical emergencies. Like you learn, like, oh, you call 911 if this happens, if there's a fire. People learn like stop, drop, and roll. A lot of people learn CPR and all these different ways to prepare for physical health emergencies. But then, like, meanwhile, you get to be like my age, like 23, and someone asks you, how do you prepare for a mental health emergency? And it's like, question marks, like what?
Yeah, exactly.
um, yeah, so I think it's so important just to prepare for that the same way you would for a physical health emergency, and especially having like a digital platform, I think makes that so much easier.
Mhm. What are some of the questions they ask, and so that when you are going through a crisis, you look back and see what resources you have available to you?
Well, I think so part of the crisis plan, like the parts about like coping skills, early warning signs, a lot of those, it's helpful to write it down because it helps you yourself sort of gauge where you're at. Because I think especially when you're experiencing a crisis or when you feel that you're starting to get better, you lose sort of like the 2020 vision. You can't
Right.
really tell how badly you're doing. You can't really tell if you need help. And so having like a documented record of that, like, oh, if I realize I haven't slept in 3 days, I need to call my friend. Or if I realize, I haven't eaten properly, I haven't showered, this might be a good time to go for a walk or get some exercise. So just having that way to hold yourself accountable, I think, is one aspect of the crisis plan. Like I said, the warning signs, the coping skills, all of those more personal things.
Would you talk about some of the strategies that people can use to try and ward off anxiety and feelings of depression right now when we're experiencing isolation?
Yeah. So a lot of the ones that are in the app that you're talking about are meant to be like really basic for people who may not have had any prior experience with therapy. So there are different kinds. One of them is like mindfulness. So just trying to be mindful. One of them is grounding, sort of grounding yourself in the moment if you're feeling overwhelmed. Deep breathing. A lot of them are like maintenance routine based skills. So, for example, they talk about the importance of like sleep, diet habits, exercise. A lot of those things that I think are especially relevant even now. Um, More towards just being proactive, I think those ones are, especially during like the quarantine. A lot of people have had to be more proactive about their mental health and figure out how to create healthy habits. So I think some of those are more towards that, and then the ones about being emotional, like the grounding, the mindfulness, they're all meant to be like really simple. Like for example, breathing. Or have you ever heard of something called paired muscle relaxation or progressive muscle relaxation? Um, and so yeah, the idea is just simple skills like that that people can do anywhere with no experience. That sort of helps them in the moment.
Mhm. What advice do you have for people who are currently struggling with mental health, who that becomes an all-consuming part of their life? And what can they do to try and turn that cycle around and maybe even like you did create something um, great out of it?
Um, yeah, honestly, I'd say the biggest thing is to have faith in yourself that you can get out of this. And I know that's way, way easier said than done. Because when you're in the moment, everything seems really bleak or you're having a really troubled time looking past. But I have only witnessed, like my friends, people I've met at hospitals go through some of the most insane situations or horrible things. And, I think people are really resilient. People end up learning to adapt, they end up learning to survive, they sort of can make their way out of it. But I think that's not the only piece. I think the other piece is obviously reaching out. And that's something that's almost equally as hard to do, especially, for young adults, for people in different communities or cultures, is being able to reach out. Not only to friends, family, but also when you need professional help, like getting therapy, getting medications. And I know especially, for like your age group, that's especially tough because you're to some extent independent, but you're still living with family, or, in the house. But it's really, really important, I think, to reach out when you need it and believe that you can work through this.
Mhm.
Because I mean it. When I, ended up having to leave school, I really felt like I had hit rock bottom. I was away from my friends. I was stuck at home. I didn't know if I was ever gonna get a degree, I didn't have a job, it was really, to me at least, a very bleak situation. Um, but here I am. I'm almost done with my junior year of college. I've been able to work on my app, been able to meet so many amazing people, been able to talk to my family, get therapy, get medication, and it's just like I really never would have thought this would have been possible had you asked me this like a couple years ago. Um, but I'm really also just grateful for the people in my life who have supported me. And I was honestly so scared to talk to most of my friends about this, especially because like a lot of them also come from Indian backgrounds, which is like, mental health is a difficult
Yeah.
topic, but people have really surprised me with how much they've supported me and taken the time to just check in on me, look out for me, even in small little ways, or my parents trying to learn more about this. It's been great.
But what advice do you have for people who are trying to become youth advocates on this issue?
Like with mental health or something like that, it's such a personal experience, and everyone has their own perspective, their own story, their own situation. And even though, at least for me, when I was first getting involved in mental health advocacy, it was sort of intimidating because I was seeing all these other people on campus or all around the world who were doing all these cool things, and I'm like, wow, I'm just this random girl from Pittsburgh. But I think so many people, even around me, just talking to my friends, supporting them, encouraging them to be open with their family, encouraging them to get professional help, directing people to resources. Like, I was honestly amazed just how much my own experiences were able to help other people, and just sharing my story, how much it, a lot like inspired some people, I think, to also be more aware of their mental health. And so I would say, like, I think everyone has value, especially in the mental health space. No matter what you've been through, no matter what you haven't been through, everyone has such a unique story and perspective to share. And so definitely share that with people around you everywhere you can, because there will be people who will hear your story and will be inspired, or who will have hope, after seeing the things that you've done and even the ways that you've, brought yourself out of this. It's, I think, really, really helpful to put that out there.
Mhm.
So don't feel intimidated by people you see on the news or people you see doing all these cool things. Everyone has such a valuable role in this, and I think it's important to share that not only with those around you, but just anyone who could be inspired by your story.